Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin savanna fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate, not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantel. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft, percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they watched the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A nabe grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. Player mechanism, Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. Some have rolls hidden in the belly. Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. No one, she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the name in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten, Bach the second, exacting and austere, American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight, old-fashioned script, "If you are reading this, you are listening," Odile had written. "If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count, I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief, and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice." The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odile's own delicate dashes. "Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper." That night, clouds flew low, too hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, "Odile?" Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. "Juniper Miles," she said, "piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious." Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. "I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now." She looked at the nave. "May I?" The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal, cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the Lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odil's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, "There," and it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, you kept one thing the way it liked to be. Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives. A siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing, a house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens. The road that GPS refuses to map, locals avoid it. They call it Limestone Cut on county maps, but no map app will take you there. Not in daylight, not at 3 in the morning, not even if you stand at the mouth of the lane with full bars and beg your phone like a superstitious traveler. The line of asphalt slips off Route 27 near the Ohio River, just past a caved-in orchard and a billboard for a roadside Jesus that no longer stands. In person, the turn is ordinary. On a screen, it is missing, as if the road and the world had decided to keep a small secret between them. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This is in southeastern Ohio, down in Gallia County, where the hills go soft and the river carries towboats like patient thoughts. The year was 2022, late September. goldenrod along the guardrails. Soybean fields gone the color of toast. I drove there on a Friday after work because a listener named Thayer Lorne had written to me with a subject line that felt like a dare. The road your GPS refuses to map. Locals avoid it. Please come before the county pours gravel again. Thayer was not a crank. She taught second grade in a brick school with a playground that leaned into a sycamore's shade. She coached a Lego league. She used the word prudent in a way that made you want to be. Her email listed dates and names the way people list ingredients. 2 wrecks in 2 years, 1 missing signage, 1 strange call to the sheriff's office just after midnight in late June. She did not say haunted, she said wrong. I left Columbus at 4:30 with a thermos of coffee and a box of gas station crackers and the kind of optimism you only get on a 2-lane infall. South on 23, east on 35. The sun slung low behind me, the way good music hides its effort. By 7:15, I rolled past Vinton's courthouse with its white clock face turning the hour into a suggestion. I kept the radio quiet. In the passenger seat, the county plat book rode buckled like a fussy child. I could feel the river before I could see it, the way the air saturated and the smell of damp earth put its hand on your shoulder. I reached the turn at dusk. Limestone Cut was marked by a county sign that had once been green and was now a speculation. A locked gate blocked a gravel spur to the right, but the paved lane went on unbothered, as if all gates were for other people. My phone sat in the cup holder, showing me nothing. The blue line ended in a gray shrug. I tried 3 apps. Same shrug. The plat book said the road existed, had always existed, and ran 2 miles east to a decommissioned ferry landing that had not seen a ferry since 1978. The app said, find another way. Thayer's warning lived in my pocket. Locals avoid it after dark. They say it runs warm. They say it has more turns than it used to. They say tires squeal on dry asphalt without your foot agreeing. The first 100 yards were ordinary. Willow and ash. An old fence stapled to posts that leaned like tired men at a bus stop. The air smelled faintly of limestone and wet leaves. Then the temperature did a small, undeniable thing. It rose. Not a gust, not a patch of sun through trees, a steady, even climb that lapped over my forearms and stayed. I glanced at the dash. Outside temp read 64, rising to 68, then 71. The date on the dash glowed September 23rd. The time said 7:47 and slipped to 7:50 without being asked. I lowered the window to let the river air in. The warm beat met the cool and negotiated a truce that left sweat at my hairline. A bend. Another. The road narrowed until it felt like a confession. The trees grew close enough to see where vines had taught them to bow. I rolled slower. A small bridge came into view, wood deck, steel truss. A sign nailed to a poplar announced 1 lane in letters that had been painted by someone who believed in understatements. Beyond the bridge, the road ripple-curved through a cut so tight the rock faces wore each other's dust. I stopped before the bridge, because I am not brave so much as careful. I set the hazard lights flashing red into green. I listened. A train whispered somewhere upriver. Crickets laid a steady carpet of sound over everything. From the cut, a thin metallic note like cooling machinery. The warm air possessed a sweetness I could not name immediately. Jams and canning season came to mind. Then the word arrived. Apples. Not Honeycrisp and not cider. Fallen apples. Ferment thinking about becoming something else. I took my notebook and recorded the details the way you do when you want the future to trust your memory. Time, temperature, smell, no wind, no other cars. Then I drove across the planks and felt the boards answer the tires like a breath under my feet. The cut rose. The hill pressed close. A corner went tighter than it looked on the approach. My rear tires slid a fraction, not enough to call it a slide, enough to make my throat say a quiet word I would not put in print. The steering wheel thudded softly, as if there were 2 wheels telling me 2 slightly different stories about straight. I eased. I took the next bend slower. There is a point in a road where the land decides whether you are a guest or a problem. Limestone Cut decided I was a slow guest and tolerated me. The warm air leveled at 76, then climbed another couple of ticks. The smell of apples deepened into something like a recipe, cinnamon without spice, yeast without bread. I passed a turnout with two straight ruts that led into grass and ended at a log older than my car. A shape hung from a branch ahead. I braked. It was a memorial, crossed from cedar rails wired together, silk flowers that had learned to be brave in rain, photos in a sleeve of plastic tacked below a name printed on glossy paper. Mireille Pasque, 19, a date in October 2020. Below it, a line her father must have chosen, the road that brought you home. I got out. The heat met me like a body. My phone tried to show me bars, then tried not to. A moth hit the hazard light and changed its mind. I stood with my hands in my pockets and felt the place balance itself on me. When I turned across the road, I noticed another set of flowers half hidden in blackberry cane. The name blew up at me when wind finally remembered how. Osric Vales, 21, May 2021. Same line. The road that brought you home. I walked farther along the cut until it opened like a sigh. The lane flattened to a seam along a scrim of meadow that used to be something else. You can tell by how grass lies. If it grows with a memory of rose, something stood there before. The sky went the color of a bruise, deciding between night and purple. A light flickered ahead, low and steady. I squinted. Not a house, not a car, a lantern, rope handle, old-fashioned glass with its bubbles catching the last light. It swung at the mouth of a driveway, if driveway is what you call two parallel lines of dirt that remember wagons. A woman stood a few feet back from it in a denim coat and boots that had done more than look good. She raised a hand. Not a stop, exactly. A hello shaped by caution. You are going the wrong way, she said. Her voice had small-town plainness and age that could have been anywhere between 35 and 55 because work makes a music of people that is hard to date. She nodded to my car. Turn around at the lane. There is no place to swing up ahead. It goes to water and then to nothing, and the bank will be slick after last night. I introduced myself. I said my name and the name of my show. Her face did not change. She untied the rope from a dogwood sapling and brought the lantern closer. The glow put a field of gold on her cheek. You are the radio girl, she said, not unkind. Thayer told me you were coming. She said you are polite. She looked at my tires. I would go back before you go forward. The ferry road has two corners that do not know they are corners, and if you slide there, you will spend the night with your axle thinking about consequences. I asked her name. She said Tamsin Holt. She kept a hand wrapped around the lantern handle, as if light were something you hold to keep it from leaving. She pointed to the bank of the cut where the rock shouldered out above us. Hear that, she said. The rock under here runs with water. Not springs exactly. Leaks from the old drain gallery. The county drilled holes so the slope would get lighter and the holes steam and fall. The air warms, the road sweats. It is not witchcraft. It is a bad idea. We keep pretending we'll dry out. Her lantern threw small moons into the glass of my windows. A flock of nighthawks cut a pattern above the trees. The warmth wrapped the throat more than the skin, which is how you know it belongs to breath or rot. Tamsin tilted her head toward the river. You cannot see it from here, but it sits too close. When the ferry ran, the road came straight to the ramp. They moved the river to suit the men, and the river said, fine, I will move the bank to suit myself. And it has been a conversation since. Why will no app draw it? I asked. She shrugged slowly, as if some questions wore heavy coats. I heard it was a break in the public line after the flood in 2004 when the county closed it to repair the approach and never told the machines they had opened it again. I heard the maps blacklisted the coordinates when a mother drove into the river by following a robot voice that said, continue. I heard a man who knows about things sent an email to a company that said, please leave it off. We are tired of retrieving tourists and their courage. The people who make those clouds of roads do not live here. They live inside a different weather. Her hand flicked lightly at the memorial. Mireille was my niece. Osric was her friend. They swung through here in a rain they thought would stay light. One slid, then the other came to help and turned around on land that looked like land and was not. The bank changes in a storm. The river is a liar that tells the truth when it feels like it. We stood with our feet on a road that wanted to be water, time thinned, the lantern made a small island, crickets sang as if the night were not worried about us at all. Thayer told me, "Locals avoid it," I said. Tamsin laughed once, a dry wire of a laugh that had carried heavier things. Locals avoid it when they are smart. Some are not smart all the time. Sometimes I am not. Sometimes I stand at the ferry mark and listen to the buckles tick when the night cools them, and tell my mother out loud that it is time to put the kettle on. She died 2 winters ago, and still I tell her, she put 50 years into this hill. The hill speaks her name when the wind is slow. You will make a story and it will be tidy, and the road will keep doing what it has done since horses learned to trust it. It will take what you said on it if you hurry. I asked if I might walk to the landing with her. She considered my shoes and the angle of the hill and the slick of wet in the lantern's light. She nodded once. We left the car with hazard lights, confessing my bad choice to whoever came next. We walked with the lantern and our breath and the warm in our faces until the dark gave us what it was holding. A low lip of concrete with bolts that had once held a chain, a post with rings that had carried ropes heavy with river. The river itself turned its blank face up and said nothing. Across the water, 3 lights ran tin-tin along a ridge. Behind us, the hill kept its gravity like a rule book. Tamsin set the lantern on the ramp and crouched. "See here." She pointed with a patience that came from knowing a place by its mischief. The asphalt meets the pour with no shelf. In summer, fine. In rain, gone. The silt builds a veneer. Your tire thinks it is road, your foot thinks it is time to turn, then you are signing a form you do not remember. She stood, the lantern painting the underside of her chin. You will want to say the road is cursed. It is not. It is low. There is a difference. Low places keep things. Heat, fog, news. People's stories when they cannot carry them anymore. This one keeps a kind of warmth that does not belong to weather. It comes from the hill and the old galleries drilled in 1952 when the county had money from a federal thing and men believed rock would behave. Rock behaves like a teenager with a kind heart. It tries until it does not. We walked back, not slow and not fast. The road felt different even in the short space between the landing and the cut. In the notebook of my body, I wrote a line I could not read until later. The turns here remember another set of hands on the wheel. I had the sense, foolish but insistent, that there are more curves than there used to be, and that the road will add one for anyone who comes distracted. At the car, Tamsin lifted the lantern again and said the thing I had not wanted to hear because it was the only thing that mattered. Do not publish the directions. If a person knows, they know, and they approach with respect. If they do not, their phone will talk them out of it and we will save work. Write about the heat. Write about the girls who keep silk flowers alive in rain. Write about how the river and the county have a conversation in October no one else gets to hear. But do not draw a map for the kind of curiosity that leaves us with Sunday morning calls. I promised her. I meant it. She nodded, then lifted the lantern to her face and blew gently so the flame leaned and stood again. Then she said the softer thing that made me like her. If you need to end your story, end it with a sentence that knows how to sit down. The road is still here without your sentence. I will walk it tomorrow with my sister and tell her about the way our mother scolded mud. That will be the end that matters. We said goodnight the way people say it when they know they will see each other in a grocery aisle soon enough. I turned the car in a careful crescent and returned over the bridge that knocked the tires politely 3 times. At the first straight stretch, I stopped and turned off the engine and the lights and sat in the dark, letting the warm air forget me. The smell of apples and limestone and old rain moved through the open window like a slow parade. Far off, a coyote made a cracked sound and then decided not to continue. I wrote in the notebook by the dash light. 8:54, 75 degrees, crickets, no wind, 1 moth determined. On the way back to Route 27, a truck came around the curve with someone from here at the wheel. He lifted 2 fingers from the top of the wheel in that rural benediction. Eyes steady. I answered in kind. We passed without incident. My phone found a signal and rushed to tell me things I did not need. I turned it face down. The river kept its counsel. I stayed at a motel with a door that opened to the parking lot and a shower that sprayed like a hose with a grudge. At 11, I lay on the bed and listened to the highway need the night. I dreamed a dream that did not need translation. I drove the road in June in a rain that put a lid on the world. I felt the turn that did not know it was a turn. I saw silk flowers underwater moving like they were alive. When I woke at 3, the room was hotter than it should have been. I set the thermostat down, it huffed, I opened the door, and the night came in like medicine. In the morning, I met Thayer at a diner with a pie display that could make you forget your name. She wore a sweater with elbows that had done more thinking than most elbows. She brought a paper yard sale sign with a hand-lettered arrow pointing left. She set it on the table next to the sugar caddy as if it were a relative. When the waitress poured coffee, Thayer said, "We used to put these at the turn because apps would not, and people would stop right there in the lane with the river in their trunk. The county asked us not to. Said it increased liability. Now we wave and we hope." "You saw Tamsin." "I did," I said. "She told me not to draw a map." "Good," Thayer said. Her mouth set around the word like a decision. I asked about the calls to the sheriff's office. She had copies. Public record after someone redacts the parts that hurt, one at 12:04 a.m. in late June. A voice breathing hard. "Can you send someone to the ferry road? I do not know if I am on a road." The operator asked for cross streets that did not exist. A second call at 12:12. Same number, a different voice. "We got her. We need a tow, not an ambulance. No injuries. No one drinks on a Thursday in this county, not like that." Thayer told me stories that were not mine to take without permission. The woman at the landing had taught Sunday school for a decade and could thread a needle in a moving truck. The boy in the BlackBerry cane had planned to enlist and then to come home. The ferry used to carry school buses and funeral processions, and once, in 1964, a parade float for the county queen when the bridge upriver closed for repairs. The operator had a name like a hymn, Dolan Pike. He took quarters with a smile and never wrote them down, and the county forgave him because he put back the difference out of his pocket at Christmas. At noon, I drove back once more because leaving is easier if you say the goodbye that feels like a choice. The day stood warm, even without the night's peculiar swell. The cut reflected a brightness that made the dashboard look cleaner than it was. I idled by the memorials, rolled down the window, and said the names out loud once each. Myray. Osric. The air did not change. The river kept the same tone of voice. A kingfisher strafed the bank and laughed meanly at an idea it did not respect. At the leveling in the trees, a county crew had set cones. 3 workers stood with a clipboard, a shovel, a rope to measure where the bank thought it should be. One of them wore his safety vest open, and the white undershirt said he had been at it since 7. He pointed at the asphalt and drew an invisible curve in the air, as if to show the piece of road how to round itself properly. Another squatted and peeled brittle weeds from a crack like string cheese. The third looked up when I slowed. He lifted a hand, the rural benediction again. I could not tell if he was welcoming me or telling me to go around. I went around. I kept the tires on the places that saw tires last time. You want a reason a road does not show up on a phone? Choose one. Bureaucracy, liability, a digital map made by a company that is afraid of being named in a lawsuit cannot afford local color. A data set that drops a line because a county closes a gate for a week, a volunteer editor who got spooked, or the oldest reason, because the people who live there asked, and the people who make maps sometimes listen. Here is the part you can keep if you are the kind of person who needs a rule. If locals avoid a road, do not decide you are immune to their reasons because you are careful. Be careful at the places where land forgets itself. Warm air on a cool night means a stone or a story is breathing, and you should give it room. If a turn looks straighter than it is, it belongs to water or to someone else's memory. If you smell apples on limestone in September where no orchard stands, that is the hill reminding you this was a farm before your car was an idea. I drove away before dark because I had promised. The 2-lane lifted me back toward the highway like a kind hand on a back. The plat book lay open to a page that showed a thin, gray line stopping shy of the river. I did not pencil it in. Some lines stay honest by remaining incomplete. Months later, when the episode aired, people wrote to tell me about roads in their own counties that maps pretend not to know. A road in Vermont that snowplows leave until last and hikers take in June only. A road in East Texas that turned to soap in rain and led to a bridge a paper mill had once owned. A road in western Pennsylvania that slid a few inches each season until the houses leaned into one another like a wedding party after the toast. None of them wanted directions. Most wanted me to say out loud the thing they already believed. A map is a promise made by someone who cannot know your exact night. I went back in winter. The river carried skim ice, and the air had lost interest in warmth. Limestone Cut breathed only rock, careful and slow. The memorials wore new ribbons that made color out of gray. Tamsin's lantern hung from a nail in her shed, unlit but ready. I parked on the turnout and watched for a long minute. No cars, no lights. Only the slow heave of a place that will outlast the names you put on it. If you ever find yourself at a turn your phone refuses to bless, do this. Put the device in the glove box, roll down your window, call the place by the names you were given by people who have rinsed dishes there. Listen for a warmth that belongs to stone or rot or story. Ask if you are a guest or a problem. If the answer takes too long, turn around, go home. Let someone else keep the road for you until you've earned it. Limestone Cut still runs from 27 to the water. Mireille and Osric still own 2 small pieces of shoulder where silk flowers learn new weather. The ferry still waits in the old bolts when fog pulls the river toward the bank. The apps still refuse, which feels like respect finally performing something like wisdom. The locals still avoid it after dark, and you can call that superstition if you want. I call it the way people learn to live, with a story that does not need their approval to keep going. Wherever you are, whichever hour you gave to this, hear this as you put the kettle on or slip your keys into a dish. A road can be true and not be for you tonight. Let that be a comfort and not an insult. The land does not need your footsteps or your tires to remember its lines. It is enough to name the warmth, bow to it the way you might bow to a neighbor, and step back into the lit part of the map where your house pours light through a window like a square of mercy. He found a staircase in the lake it still goes up. He saw it when the wind fell off and the lake lay down like glass, a sudden stillness that made every shoreline detail stand at attention. The afternoon sun had taken a step toward evening, yellowed and steady, and the north cove of Lake Lanier went calm enough to show the bones under it. He cut his aluminum skiff to idle and drifted toward the pale shoulder of exposed clay. There, not random at all, a run of stone steps pushed up from green water and kept going into nothing the shore could explain, even and true, as if they still believed a front door was waiting at the top. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2022, after a summer of stingy rain and long afternoons when the heat felt like it had signed a lease. The lake sat northeast of Atlanta, a blue map of drowned hills and red clay coves, and that year it had read its gauge and decided to show some of what history had asked it to forget. Foundations revealed themselves like old teeth. The ghostly lanes of a 2-lane road slipped out of the murk and pointed nowhere. Between Bald Ridge and the mouth of 6 Mile Creek, a staircase announced itself and waited for a person with the right kind of attention to see it. Riven Kettering had that kind of attention. 38. A carpenter and part-time rescue diver who liked small engines and the honest work of making broken things carry weight again. He lived in a rental off Pilgrim Mill Road with a dog who had taught herself to sleep through sirens. He was not a romantic, not really. He was the kind of man who listened to what a hinge said when it wasn't being looked at. The lake had been a job and a solace for him since he moved down from the foothills of Tennessee a decade earlier, and on afternoons like this one, he took his old skiff out to idle over the drown. The staircase began 3 steps below the surface, pale rectangles set into the clay, then climbed above waterline, slick with algae, where yesterday had touched and left. 12 risers showed drop. They marched up the bank as if they had no intention of stopping, then continued past where stone ended, the air holding their measure with a confidence that made nothing in Riven's head feel quite steady. He nosed the skiff forward until its snub bow made a soft knock against the lowest dry riser. The hull and the stone talked for a second, low and hollow. He stood, keeping knees loose, eyes at a level where you can decide a thing without pretending it's not, pretending you first. The steps were fieldstone set into a poured bed, careful work from when hands were steadier because nothing had asked them to type yet. He could see where the mortar had let go, hairline by hairline, and where a leaf had chosen to become fossil rather than compost. He stepped out. The rock took his weight with a small, agreeable groan. He climbed, counting aloud the way you do when a rhythm wants to prove it's a law. 7, 8, 9. A wet line at his ankles where he had waded the shallow to push the skiff in. 10, 11, 12. He stopped where stone ended. The sidewalls rose one more course and then gave way to air. Ahead of him, nothing. Above him, more nothing. And yet his right foot, when he slid it forward with the caution of a man who had once fallen through a rotten porch and did not intend to audition for that pain again, found resistance. Not stone, not water. Not empty. A density like stretched cloth, like cold-pressed sugar, like a stare that remembered itself and refused to forget just because the lake had been told to be a lake. He drew his foot back, scalp prickling, breath in a pocket he didn't want to open too fast. He looked around to see if anyone else had been presented this joke. No one. In late September, a Tuesday can make a cove your private chapel. Far out, a pontoon boat moved like a floor with music on it. Closer in, a blue heron had made the stump of an old post into a claim. Riven set his palm above the end of the stone into the air where a banister would be if someone had finished the thought. He felt nothing until he pushed a hair past what he thought was safe. Then he felt a boundary, the exact height of a handrail in a code book he could recite. He smiled despite the way his heart had decided to pick up the tempo. Something here hadn't drowned entirely. Something here had decided to keep going up. He does not scare fast, Riven. He is a man who has gotten into dark water at night, kindly, and come back calmer for it. But he respects a place with a memory. He went back down the 12 risers and climbed into the skiff and sat with his hand on the tiller and let the lake tell him if it wanted him to be braver than his grandmother would approve. The wind was a rumor now. On the far shore, a transformer hummed with the stale sweetness of electricity. He turned the motor off and drifted with his fingers brushing the gunwale and felt for the old current under the new. A loon called once out in the main channel, the syllable bending toward a kind of loneliness that doesn't need an audience. Riven looked back at the steps. The air above the 13th riser shimmered, a trick of light or a rule he hadn't been told yet. He swore softly in the old way that buys you permission to try again. He pulled the skiff onto the red bank, tied it off to a scar of root, and went back up the 12. He did what his hands knew to do. He turned a coin on its edge and rolled it along the last stone. When it tipped forward into air, it did not fall. It sat against nothing, as if pressed to a glass he could not see. He slid it forward with one finger and felt it drag over an edge. He slid his boot after it and met a tread that had weight. He put his full foot down and his bones agreed that physics had not been insulted, only invited to a different kind of party. He brought the other foot up. He stood on the 13th step of something that existed without confessing to the eye. He took one more. 14. He stopped. He is not a fool. He turned to look at the lake, which does not care if you find it holy or treacherous, so long as you understand which mood it is in. The cove held its breath. He stepped backward down the 2 air treads with a caution that felt like a prayer you say without agreeing you're saying it. He stood again on stone that had no arguments and breathed the kind of breath that renters of boats make when the motor coughs once and then forgives you. Lake Lanier carries stories the way clay carries footprints. Old towns lie under it, old churches, the ghost lanes of old Federal Road. People will tell you about a stalled truck on a fogged bridge and a handprint on the back window after, about divers who won't go down a second time because they looked through a school of crappie and saw a porch swing move. Some of that is what happens when humans leave water to be the keeper of their history. Some of that is people being lonely and needing their fear to wear a costume. Riven carried none of those stories in the silly way. He carried them the practical way. He knew people had been told their land would drown for the good of cities they would never see, and some of those people had said their names into the bank and put rocks one on another to make the land remember. He went home with the staircase in his notebook and in his knees. He did not say the shape of it to the bartender at the place on Brown's Bridge, who called everybody chief. He did not post a photo because the lake punishes people who turn it into spectacle. He slept badly and woke before his alarm and made coffee meaner than necessary and drove back with a coil of thin rope and a chalk box and the tape measure he used when perfection had to be part of the bill. Morning Lake, blue as breath. The skiff skittered over wind ruffles and slid into the cove willing. He tied a chalk line at the last stone and played it out up the air, marking nothing with blue dust that caught in nothing and hung there like a trick. He laughed once, quietly. He measured riser height with the tape and found consistency that would have made a county inspector nod. He tied a loop in the rope and lowered it down the near face of the steps. The loop sat against an invisible edge and held, not tight, not loose, as if politely told to wait. Half an hour went by that way. Numbers, angles. The carpenter in him building a drawing that would keep his fear inside its lines. When he finished, he sat with his back against the sidewall and let his head find the cool of stone that had learned shade. The world stepped closer. From somewhere he could not triangulate came a sound that reminded him of a bicycle bell rung just once. In politeness, he stood. The sound did not come again. He walked down the 12 and waited on the shoreline while the lake decided whether to ignore him or to grant him more. A woman called from the top of the red bank. Riven looked up. She was tall and rangy, mid-40s, wearing the kind of straw hat that makes a person look like they know how to move in weather. She carried a camera with a strap that had been repaired twice and a notebook bulging with the kind of paper that did not come out of printers. She introduced herself with a grin that answered questions he had not asked. Mara Clary. She ran a small outfit that mapped drowned towns and grave relocations for counties that cared to admit their forgetting. She had a copy of the Army Corps' old charts and a habit of showing up where the lake loaned the present to the past. "I've been told you've got steps," she said, "and that they keep going up." He wanted to ask who had been talking. He wanted not to have his name in a stranger's mouth. But she put her hand on the sidewall like a careful person says hello to an old horse, and the way her face took in what she saw made him feel less alone in his own seeing. He nodded. He told her his name and the number of air treads he'd let himself trust. She whistled low. "Lanier tells on itself every few years," she said, eyes on the shimmer above the 13th. "But I haven't seen it do this. Fieldstone, that would have been a front walk probably. Or the stairs to a porch. You can tell from the way these aren't as steep as church steps. And there would have been a dog who slept halfway up until someone came home at supper." "Everyone says that about any porch," he said, smiling despite himself. "Only because it keeps being true," she said, and laughed like a sound the cove had missed. They measured together, she took photos, he held a stick out over the air risers and watched the end bounce against nothing. They left offerings the old way. He peeled the paper off a peppermint and set it on the third stone step. She untied a strip of blue cloth from her hat and tied it to the root that held his skiff's rope. The lake, if it acknowledged that at all, did not show it. She opened her notebook to a page where she had copied in neat letters the names and dates of households taken when the valley was flooded in the early 1960s. 2 farms had sat on this spur, the Sumter place, the Jory place. Sumter had 5 children and a clean way with fence lines. Jory was famous for a Sunday table and a sour temperament the rest of the week. The county had cut checks and called it a necessity. The stairs could have been either family's. But on the sidewall, low near the 5th riser, they found a mark cut into mortar with a nail or a stubborn penknife. A letter. "Jay, you think Jory," she said. "Or June," he said. "Or Josephine. Or a boy who didn't get to grow into his handwriting writes their first initial into any stone that isn't busy." The lake made a small sound against the hull, a shrug. They came back the next day and the next after that. In the afternoons, teenagers on rental jet skis came to grammar the water did not admire. In the mornings, a heron watched like a magistrate. Once, a man in a bass boat cut his engine and drifted nearer and asked if the invisible was real or a trick. And when Riven told him the truth, he raised his cap and said, "Well then," and idled away because some facts want to be left alone to keep being facts. On the fifth day, just after noon, when the light loses some of its slant and the lake starts its long exhale toward evening, the air changed. Riven was on the 14th invisible tread, Mara 2 below on stone, the rope tied at his ankle as if that kind of thing would help. He felt a pressure move across his shin like a child's study of a newel post. The hair on his forearms declared a vote. He looked up. Above him, a faint dark line hung in the bright. A lintel, if you wanted to pretend to see one. A line where a door might have decided to sit if it still meant to. He lifted his hand slowly and let it hover. It met resistance at the height where a latch would be if people had followed the same measurements here as they did in town. He pressed a fraction and felt the air give. Not much, not enough to invite him, only enough to say, "I know what you are asking for," and no. He withdrew his hand. He did not try again. He went back down and sat on the 6th stone step and put his elbows on his knees and let his head go heavy in the way of a man who knows the difference between a closed door and an answer. "Not today," Mara said, not unkindly. "Doesn't mean never." A storm ran around the rim of the lake that night and forgot how to come down. The next morning broke clean and noisy, with birds relieved to be right about the Sunday. When they returned to the steps, the peppermint was gone. The strip of cloth whispered against the root when the wind remembered it. On the 4th stone riser, a line had been drawn in the red dust by a finger that had not belonged to wind. 4 short lines, 1 long. The way a person keeps track of days when they are doing a job no one else is counting, they looked at each other like people who have been included in a conversation without earning it. Mara wrote down the marks in that tidy, practical hand. Riven climbed to 14 again and did not press the air where the latch would be. He listened instead. It is an old trick. The more you don't demand to hear, the more willing a place is to say its piece. Somewhere above him, at the end of the invisible run, a sound came faint, almost an opinion. The scrape of a chair, foot against a wooden floor. Once, then a breath, remarkably ordinary, let out by someone who was done with a small effort and is pleased to have finished. He let his knees bend and went back down step by careful step. The county put out a notice, polite as a church lady, asking people not to climb anything that felt like absence. A man from the Corps came by with a clipboard and a caution that did not include humor and told them to rope the place from the bank. They tied a line and left it slack enough to be ignored by whatever needed to come and go. Mara logged coordinates and photographs and the exact color of the lichens on the sidewall. Riven made a drawing of the steps that showed the air ones the way you show trust, with dotted lines and a note that says, "As found." Word spread anyway. It always does when to leave a thing alone would be the more complicated form of love. A grandmother came and watched from the shade and told her granddaughter a story about the summer her brother rode a bike into a field that is now part of the lake and fell and did not cry, because corn leaves will cut you if you give them. An audience. A man in a Braves cap stood for a long time with his hands in the back pockets of his jeans and didn't tell anyone why his eyes kept the gloss they kept. A boy clapped once and apologized, and then asked if the staircase sounded like anything, and when Riven told him about the scrape and the breath, the boy looked toward the place where a door might be and whispered, "Thank you," like a student to a teacher who has handed out permission slips to freedom. On a Wednesday morning in early October, the lake rose 2 inches. The first stone step went green again. The 12th stayed dry. Riven set his palm to the sidewall as he had begun to do without design and said the names of the months out loud as if they were a key. Mara arrived late, hair in a bandana printed with little cranes, a thermos in one hand and a sheet of onion skin paper in the other, the thin kind that takes pencil and lets the stone's texture come up through. She rubbed the J, the nail-cut letter, and the tally marks. When she lifted the paper, the letter and the lines looked like a message written by someone whose words had to be rationed. She tucked the rubbing into her notebook with a care Riven recognized as kin to prayer. By noon, clouds built into a boast. Mara packed her camera because electric things deserve not to be insulted by weather. Riven untied the rope at his ankle and coiled it with the absent-minded competence of someone who likes ropes for the way they make order out of risk. The air above the 14th step felt different. Cooler, somehow. Denser. He looked up and wanted more than he would have admitted the week before to see something acknowledge him. Not a face, not a figure, an idea. The lake refused. It kept to its rights. Before the storm broke, a small group arrived in silence. Not tourists, not thrill seekers. People in good shoes that did not belong to docks. A woman in a navy blazer. A man whose tie had been loosened by degrees and had stopped at 3. An older woman with a cane that looked like it had been carved by someone who understood trees better than money. They stood on the bank above the line and watched the steps like people watching someone figure skate after having once skated the same routine 3 decades ago and remembering what the body used to hold. The older woman spoke first, to the stone, not to the living. "You kept it," she said. "You stubborn thing. I told them you would." She introduced herself when Riven climbed down to the bank with his curiosity plainly showing. Ada Sumter Jory. Not a marriage, she was quick to clarify, but a habit of names borrowed and kept. Her father had been a Sumter, her mother a Jory by necessity and grievance. She had been 10 when the men from the government came and put stakes on the hill and told her they were measuring to make the river useful. She had been 14 when the kitchen was dismantled and stored in a relative's shed, and the porch chairs were put on a truck without the porch. She had been 15 when the lake finally climbed to the 7th stair and the dogs refused to sleep where they had always slept and had to learn ground new as a dollar. "My granddaddy set those stones," she said, chin lifting toward the steps. He knew the grade by eye. House stood there. She pointed at the air, ran long that way. Kitchen at the back, where mornings were honest. Stairs to the sleeping rooms tucked in right of the door. He told me we build stairs for coming and going and for waiting. That last part is where the world gets the math wrong. She cleared her throat once, a small thing that meant a larger thing had moved through it. "My brother wrote his letter J in the mortar before it set," she said, and smiled fully for the first time. He was 5 and mad because he had not been allowed to carry a stone and needed to have done something the porch would remember. They watched the lake together as it considered which forenoon belonged to which afternoon. Mara showed Ada the rubbing, and Ada put her palm on the paper like a hand over a baby's sleeping flank. "He stayed mean," she said of Jory, but without any real heat. But he loved that stare. Sat halfway up when he had nothing to do and the weather had nothing to argue about. Played that little bell you keep hearing because he liked the neatness of a sound that stops when you take your finger off it. The storm arrived, they covered what needed covering, the skiff rocked and complained, and then remembered it had been in worse moods and calmed. The rain washed the red dust off the risers and gave them back their gray. The air cooled like a head turning on a pillow to the comfortable side. Ada walked down to the 2nd step and touched it like the forehead of a child with a fever breaking. "Enough," she said to the rain, to the year, to the air that had learned to hold treads. In the weeks that followed, the staircase did what durable things do when they decide to belong to more than one story. It kept being itself. The lake rose and smudged the lower steps and then pulled back like a long breath returned. Riven kept coming because he had begun to like the feeling of leaving a place better than he found it by doing nothing but listening the way a well-made chair listens when a tired person sits. Mara wrote a piece for the County Historical Society that began with the sentence, "There are places we drown and places that refuse." Ada came twice more and told the stair her brother's best and worst. And once, on a bright Sunday, when the buzz of outboards sounded like cicadas pretending to be important, she brought a tin of biscuits and left one on the 3rd step because her mother would have called it manners. On a morning in November, the air thin and brisk, frost like pale sugar on shaded clay, Riven came alone. The lake had taken back an inch, The first two steps glowed green. He stood at the foot and waited the way you learn to wait when you've been given more than you asked and are smart enough not to get greedy. The wind came off the water and put its fingers through his hair with a familiarity he hadn't earned. Above the 14th tread, the line where a lintel would be shivered and then settled. He put his hand out at the height of a latch and did not press. "Thank you," he said to nothing and to something. He went home and made lunch and fixed a neighbor's sagging cabinet and walked his dog in the long honey of 4 o'clock. He slept that night without the lake climbing the stairs of his thoughts. He dreamed he was sanding a handrail he could not see and woke with the particular ache in his forearm that tells a man he did a good day's work in the world that matters and the one that does not need him but lets him in anyway. If you go out to Lake Lanier on a fall day after a long dry, when the wind has the courtesy to lie down and let the surface polish itself, you can find the cove if you know who to ask and you promise out loud not to bring a ladder. The staircase will be there, stepping up from water into air with the patience of a body that has learned not to argue with time. You can put your boot on the 12th stone and your breath on your rib cage and decide if you will push your foot forward into the space where the 13th waits. If you do, it will hold. Not because wonder owes you, but because someone set a measure here with care, and because sometimes the world keeps an old promise in a new element. Say the year out loud when you find it. 2022. Say the place by its names. Lanier and the valley it drowned. Say the people if you know them. Sumter. Jory. Say the letter on the wall. J. Say the noise a bicycle bell makes when a brother likes attention and the porch has all afternoon. If you leave something, make it small. A ribbon, a peppermint, a finger laid gently in dust to make a line that will blow away with the next weather. Walk back down, let your knees do what they were built to do. Put your hand on the sidewall the way you would on a friend's shoulder when leaving them on their own porch in the dark to listen to the crickets. The staircase will keep going up whether or not your eyes can follow it. It will keep its measure in the air. The lake will rise and cover the lower treads and then fall back and confess again. Boats will hum. Herons will judge. A woman in a straw hat will rub letters onto paper, and a man with a dog who sleeps through sirens will coil rope and listen. And somewhere under the calm skin of the cove, where red clay holds onto everything it can hold, a front door you cannot see will stay shut and not unkindly, practicing the hardest kind of hospitality there is, offering you a way to ascend and a way to wait, and trusting you to know which one belongs to you today.